Founders, welcome back to the 0 to 5,000 podcast, where we obsess over the convergence of human potential and business results. Today, our hosts Drew McClure and Jordan Mitchell have another insightful conversation for you. So let's jump right in.
All right, founders, welcome back to the podcast. Today, we are joined by Juan Chavez. Juan is a multi-passionate business owner who, before living in Medellin for the last 15 years, was living in New York. His portfolio of companies includes a drop-shipping e-commerce business in the automotive industry that has been in the Inc. 5000 6 years in a row, called JMC Automotive Equipment, also a VIP concierge and entertainment company in Colombia that focuses on VIP clients and handles everything from A to Z for groups coming to Medellin and Cartagena, and a real estate investment firm that specializes in buying and selling properties in New Jersey and South Carolina. And today, to tell us about himself and his journey, is Juan himself. Juan, thank you for being here.
Drew, thank you for having me.
Awesome, man. Well, you have obviously now a multitude of businesses, but I assume there was a first. How did you first come to starting a business?
So I first started a business when I moved to Medellin 15 years ago. I opened up a call center selling financial products, like credit card negotiation type of stuff, which I was 26 at the time. And that fell horribly after like a year and a half, like too much partying and not enough focus, and basically just didn't go the way that we wanted to go for several reasons. And after that, I opened up the Inc. 5000 business that I have, which is JMC Equipment. So that was the second business that I created, and that's still going on. Obviously, it's like, this year, hopefully we do about $10 million in revenue. That company has been an Inc. 5000 company 6 years in a row since 2018. So, that was the second business.
Heck yeah. Did you always know you wanted to start your own business versus just, joining a company somewhere?
Funny enough, when I was in college, I joined a fraternity, which was like a Latino fraternity, and I wanted to be a Latin American history teacher. So I'm a history buff. So at that point, I was like, you know what, I want to become a teacher. Then I found out how much teachers make, and I was like, yep, I don't want to do that anymore.
So when did it switch to start your own thing?
I think after close to graduation. I mean, my parents or my father has always been an entrepreneur. Like, he's always had his own business. So that was kind of like, that was always in the back of my mind, right? But when I was in college, I was like so into history and stuff and that type of things that I was like, hey, maybe teacher might be like a good option. But I think like entrepreneurship runs in my blood. So that was always like, hey, I want to open up my own business. And that was something that I always wanted to do.
Yeah. What did you most learn as an entrepreneur with that first business that failed?
The reason that we failed was, one, because I was young and we were partying a lot when we first got here, and two, because government changed some laws that actually affected the way we got paid for those negotiations that we did, right? And at one point, we had somebody came up to us and said, "Hey, why don't you guys do this on the back end? You guys should do the negotiations. It's not that hard." We didn't want to do the logistical part. All we wanted to do was just do the sales, because we were good at sales. So we were like, "No, we're fine. We're going to do this," right? So of course, hindsight, if we would have actually done the logistics where we actually did our own negotiations, that business would have probably still be alive and thriving. But because we kind of just wanted to focus on one thing, which was sales, instead of marketing, instead of the logistical part of the negotiations, I guess for lack of better words, maybe call it lazy, that we actually didn't, the business fit.
Gotcha. And then when you started JMC, I mean, that's a totally different industry and business. How did you stumble onto that?
So my father has been in automotive repair shops. He's a distributor for 20 years, right? So right out of college, I actually started working with a company called Snap-on. I don't know if you heard of the Snap-on trucks. So so my father was doing that, not with the Snap-on truck, but with the heavy equipment, right? So he suggested that I go into I had my own territory in New Jersey. I was in New York at the time. So I started doing that for like a year and a half. I was 21, 22. So I was going up against guys that were 50 or 60 years old, that were 40 years in the industry, knew the ins and outs, kind of like my father. So after a year and a half, I decided to hey, this is not for me. I'm not a door-to-door sales guy. I'm good at sales, but I don't like door-to-door sales, right? So a couple of years after, after that, I got into real estate in Wall Street. I was a real estate agent in Wall Street in New York. And then afterwards, once I was living in Medellin and the first business failed, randomly I call my pops and I ask him like, hey, how's the business going? Right? And he's like, oh, it's going good. Like, and just, as an entrepreneur at the time, I was like, how many people are you visiting? Like, kind of asking those questions. And he was only able to visit about 10 people a day. So, right. So at that time, I was kind of like getting into digital marketing. This is like in the early stages of digital marketing and e-commerce, where I was like, hey, why don't you create a website where instead of you having to go to people, people come to you.
Mm-hmm.
And then you do marketing and people come to you. And he was like, that's never going to work. Forget about that idea. And I was like, and I was like, hey, I'm kind of broke right now. Can I borrow $500 and I create this website for you? And he was like, if you wanna spend your time doing that, sure. Here's $500. So he sent me $500. I bought the domain, kind of did a open source e-commerce platform, and put up some products up. Started working on the digital marketing, and 3 months after I launched the website, we got our first sale. It was like a $4,000 lift sale.
Wow.
And then I remember waking up that morning and I saw the sale in my email, and I was like, oh my God, it's working. This actually worked. Okay, let me put all my focus on that, because at the time I was like, all right, what do I do to make money? So I was teaching martial arts. I was doing several things, basically just to feed myself. And once the sale came in, I was like, okay, let me go 100% in on this. And that's how the business basically started.
Wow. Okay. So then what is the nuts and bolts of the business?
We are automotive equipment distributors. We're basically we're distributors for the biggest brands of automotive equipment in the United States, which include, probably no one's ever heard of it, Benpack, Challenger, RGI, Tuxedo lifts, AMGO. These are all 2-post lifts, 4-post lifts, the heavy equipment that you see when you go to automotive repair shops, right? And we, for the most part, everything is drop shipped from the manufacturer, right? So orders come in through us. Obviously, we do digital marketing. We do all the type of marketing that we can. Orders come to us, and then we send the order to the manufacturer, and the manufacturer sends it to the client.
How did you get in with those big brands?
At first, my father had one big manufacturer, which was Challenger. So they were probably at the time one of the biggest and the most popular companies out there. And then after that, I literally cold every manufacturer in the book. And they didn't know me, of course. So they were like, nope, we don't know you. We don't know who you are. Of course, so they all of them basically shut the door on my face. But after we started doing digital marketing, little by little, some manufacturers started coming around and started calling us instead of me calling them. So basically kind of started building a little brand in the small niche that we have. So
heck yeah.
Now we have over 100 brands on our website.
Wow. Okay, so you took the opportunity of that one brand, Challenger, giving you a shot, and then you delivered so well that other people started calling?
Pretty much. Well, luckily, my father was already a distributor with Challenger. So it wasn't that I had to work to get Challenger. He was just like, hey, I already have Challenger, just put the products up on the website. So that was pretty easy, right? But the hard part was actually getting other manufacturers to give us their products, right? Because being that it's 2,000, well, at that time it was $2,000 lifts, right? Now it's $4,000 lifts. Nobody wanted to give, and I was 26, 27 at the time, they didn't know who I was, so nobody trusted us, and but that was a hard part, But again, once they saw that, hey, we're moving Challenger, or we're moving those products, and we have a reputation, then people started calling us, right?
Yeah. What were you doing, if you can recall, what were you doing inside the digital marketing that was actually working?
SEO. So at first we started doing SEO. So we did. That's how I started with digital marketing. I learned a little bit about SEO. Funny enough, at the time I didn't know it was black hat SEO. So I don't know if you know the difference between black hat and white hat SEO. So
Well, I know those terms in terms of hacking. I haven't heard it applied to SEO.
So black hat is basically if you just kind of create a blog, for example, create 10 blogs and just hyperlink your website to that blog. So of course, every time you add a link, it gives more power to your website. So like we did that. Let's say instead of doing it 10 times, we did it 100 times. So
Wow.
of course, in 2010, 2009, 2010, the Google wasn't I'm assuming wasn't as advanced as the algorithms now, right? So like we became first. We were on the first page of Google for several keywords, and we were like, oh man, this is working great.
Yeah.
And of course, I think in 2010 or 2011, Google changed the algorithm, and they were like, oh, what SEO used to work, it's not going to work anymore. Now you have to do it a different way. So we're like, oh my God, like what did we just do? We just messed everything up. So our ranking went from the first page of Google to literally like the last page of Google. So, so at that point, we had to change our strategy, right?
Yeah.
Which was more on the Google paid ads campaigns. We're like, all right, we did SEO, it didn't work. We're obviously going to continue doing it a different way, like a more, I guess, ethical way or white hat SEO. But we have to work on products that are or a marketing strategy that we're going to have sales right away instead of like SEO, which takes 6 months to a year, depending on what keyword you're trying to rank for.
Gotcha. And so primarily the strategy had to change to Google paid ads. Okay. And how successful was that?
Very successful. Like at first, I don't think too many people were doing it, and then our niche is so small that at that time, we didn't have too much competition, right? We have maybe 4 or 5 websites that competed with us. So like, whatever we would put up, like we would get a good ROI for the amount of money that we spent.
How many years into business were you when you had to change that strategy?
Probably 2 years, I think.
Okay.
Like I said, I launched the website in 2010. And I think 2011 and 2012, that's when we had to change the strategy.
Was that the biggest hurdle you faced in those first 2 years?
One of the biggest hurdles. I mean, I think being that other hurdles was being that it was my first business, my first time managing people. Like I didn't know how to lead people correctly. Didn't know how to delegate things correctly. Also, the chargebacks were a problem. Because like we didn't know at that time. When I first started, I didn't know. Well, first of all, I didn't know what a chargeback was, let alone a fraudulent chargeback. Right, so I remember like a $7,000 order came in at one time where I was like, great, a $7,000 order, let me send it out. Let's ship the products. And turns out that it was somebody had stolen credit card information, and then so I was like, okay, that was a big mistake. We just literally lost $7,000 because we already shipped the products, right? So it was definitely several hurdles that we had to overcome.
Yeah, I would imagine in any drop shipping business that would be a common challenge. Is that right?
Yeah. Like I mean, little by little, we started getting better at the fraudulent chargebacks. It was little details that we had to pay attention to. Like for example, where the billing and shipping address is, if we're shipping a big item to an apartment, so those are little things that we started taking a look at, right? And then, but I found out. I mean, I realized that took a long time, and it caused stress between my agents and myself, because now it was like my agents. My customer service reps would take a look at that, and they would see, yeah, everything looks good, but I had to say, yes, it's a go or not. And sometimes that decision was like, oh man, like this is literally like an $8,000 product we're about to send or to ship. Everything looks good, but if I make a mistake, that's $8,000 that's going down the drain, right? So we started implementing something called chargeback insurance, where like it insures any type of orders for fraudulent orders, not friendly chargebacks. Because a friendly chargeback is, let's say I send you a product and you don't like it, that's consider a friendly chargeback. But if somebody's credit card is stolen, that's a fraudulent chargeback. So if the chargeback insurance says, yes, that's a good order, you could ship it out, and they make a mistake, we get credited for that product.
Is that a third party that you found?
Third party, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's huge then.
Yeah, it saved a lot of time and a lot of stress and a lot of money too as well.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit more expensive than regular credit card merchant companies.
Gotcha. Okay. As you look back at those early years, what were some of the key foundations that you laid that has made this successful?
I think trying to figure out what I wanted to delegate first, right? So for example, when I first started, I was doing everything. I was doing the marketing, the sales, the logistics. I accounting, everything, right? So I said to myself, okay, what is the easiest thing that I can delegate, logistics, like all it is basically just talking to the client, making sure that they have the right information or the right address, sending the product out or sending the order out to the manufacturer, which is, I mean, it's easy, but it's a lot of steps, right? So, and to be honest with you, I kind of hated doing that, because it's like, this is so repetitive. I'd rather focus on sales or rather focus on marketing, and this is taking time. So I was like, hey, that's a no-brainer. Let me hire somebody to do that part of the business.
Yeah.
So little by little, that's why, okay, like what's the next thing that somebody could take on from me that I don't like doing? For example, accounting, right? Like, all right, let me hire an accountant or let me hire, or whatever, right? And then little by little it was like, all right, I have more than enough leads that I can't handle all of them. Let me hire a sales guy. And then little by little, that's how I started building the team.
Cool.
And of course, sometimes I would make the mistake of like, hey, you know what? Don't even worry about it. I can take care of this in 5 minutes instead of teaching you, like taking an hour to teach you. So that kind of like, that was a big problem too, where I didn't know how to like either delegate or teach correctly or have the procedures and the steps and the systems in place in order to like, hey, this is how you do it. You do it now, right? Like I would just be like, hey, you know what? Forget it. I'll do it. That was kind of my biggest thing. And then like, of course, it's like, teach a man how to fish, right? Or give a man how to fish or teach a man how to fish.
Yeah.
I wasn't doing that. And little by little, I was like, hey, this is what I have to do. I have to become a leader, not just a leader, but an actual coach.
Yeah.
On different aspects of the business, whether it's sales, logistics, the marketing aspect, right? And then obviously create the systems, create the KPIs, all these things.
Yeah, dude, that's so well said. I don't think we had a chance to talk about this beforehand, but my business outside the podcast is I coach executives and leaders of Inc. 5000 companies and beyond. And something you mentioned that has been key to delegation that we found is embracing slowing down in order to speed up. It's that first part that usually keeps us from delegating because we're like, no, it's slowing me down. Like I can do this in 15 minutes. I can do this faster than somebody. But what you're sacrificing is that long-term speed up where if I took the time to teach you, then the business accelerates because I get off of that function and somebody else gets to run with it and that frees me up. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Pretty much. Yeah, correct. Like you said it all, right? Like, again, looking back when I was doing it, I was like, yeah, don't worry about it, I'll do it. But that, of course, created like that I had to do that same thing over and over and over again.
Yes.
Because I was impatient. I was like, hey, I want it now, which is probably most entrepreneurs' problem.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of like, all right, let me slow down. What do we need? How do I teach this person? How do I? And now, before I was just like, hey, let me just teach you the system. Now I'm like, all right, let me teach you why you have to do it. Instead of just like, hey, just do the procedure. Like, what's the reason behind you doing this particular thing? Why is it so important to the company? So I'm giving the person the why, like, the actual purpose behind it. Not just, hey, do it because I tell you to do it and it's important, right? That's not a way to be a good leader. Also, just like, hey, I'm the boss and I tell you what to do. That's not good either. You don't get the same results, excuse me.
Absolutely. That's what I was going to say. You don't get the same level of ownership from that person if they don't really know why this matters. Why am I doing this? The other thing I want to highlight to the listener is something very brilliant that you did naturally, and it was the decision-making process of I know I need to delegate, but what do I start with? And that's a common thing. I was meeting with a business owner about 6 months ago. They knew they were the choke point to the business because their hand was in everything. And so they said, but I don't know what to start with. And so I just brought like a simple 2x2 matrix to help make the decision. 2 categories. Do I like it or not like it? And am I good at it or not good at it? And then that forms a 2x2. I either like it and I'm good at it. I like it. I'm not good at it. I don't like it. I'm good at it. I don't like it. I'm not good at it. Easiest place to start was where you did. I don't like it and I'm not good at it. Like, anything that's in that category needs to be the first thing to go because you're incapable of doing it well and you don't enjoy it. It doesn't give you energy. And so we put it through a list of, can I delete it? Can I automate it? Or can I delegate it? Either one. Can I get rid of it altogether? Is it necessary for the business? Or can I automate it? Is there a system out there that I could pay for or, software? Or can I just delegate it to someone who it's in their category of like it and good at it. And we just started offloading crap, man. She was feeling so amazing. She was like, oh, yeah. And then we just worked our way through that matrix to where eventually over months or years, you're left at, I'm like it and I'm good at it. That's your optimal use of time. Have you seen a similar, I know you weren't using that in your own mind, but you mimicked it pretty well. You're like, I didn't like it. I wasn't good at it. So I got rid of that first. Have you seen a similar progression for you?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't do the whole strategy where I literally just said I hate logistics because it's just so repetitive and it's doing the same thing over and over. I'll hire somebody for this.
Yeah.
Luckily, being in Medellin, I can hire somebody a little cheaper than the United States. Obviously somebody that spoke very very good English, and that was a plus. But at the end of the day, it was just something that came, I guess, naturally. Where now it's just like a little bit more strategic because now it's just like, all right, what do I do that's going to move the needle?
Right.
And me talking, I mean, I now have like a team of six sales guys that obviously handle all the sales calls. So I'm like, all right, what's gonna move the needle a lot more, right? It's like these strategic thinking, these like the coaching aspect of it. Obviously, I take a lot of classes. I take a lot of leadership classes. I take a lot of sales classes. So I bring that back to the business, and I teach my guys that same thing.
Yeah. So is that kind of visionary component, visionary strategy, and then coaching your people? Is that in your list of I like to do it and I'm good at it?
Yes, correct. Completely.
Cool. And do you see a disproportionate return when you spend your time doing that versus things that you're not great at and don't enjoy doing?
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Like I usually since I've done every role in the company, like I'll look at it and especially with the manager, right? I'll sit down and say, okay, how are we doing this? Well, how can we make it better? And I try to have that information come from the managers because they're doing this on a daily basis. I'm not doing that anymore, right? But I kind of like push them and question them, so that's how, like, I challenge them, hey, how do we make it better? How do we make it, easier for you guys to do it? How do we make it more efficient? How are we thinking outside the box so we can do this much better and easier?
Cool. Yeah. It's interesting. I've done like 300 plus of these interviews. And what I've seen with really successful people over the long haul is there's kind of a myth that we need to be always working on being well-rounded. That's like, I know I've got strengths and weaknesses, but I just need to always be working on my weaknesses and be a well-rounded, know everything in the business. What I've seen is similar to you. You have to be well-rounded enough. Like, I need to know intimately the different aspects of my business so I can speak to it and understand it. But at some point you start rigging the game to set yourself up to be really dominating what you're best at. And then you empower other people to do the same thing, right? Where you're like, I could work forever on being good at logistics, or I could just get that off my plate and I could double down on how do I just keep being in the visionary seat? How do I empower my people, coach them, and then you start getting real results from that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, there's a quote, and I'm sure everyone in this podcast has heard it, is like, you have to work on your business, not in your business.
Yes.
Because if you're working in your business, for example, doing the sales calls or like answering calls, you're not going to see, okay, what's the next step for the business, or how can we make this more efficient, right? How do I connect all the dots, all the departments, right? Marketing, sales, customer service, right? And then once you have that down, all right, what's the next step for the business, right? Like in the next 2 years, what can we do and how do we work towards that? Right?
Yeah.
So for example, like obviously we sell automotive equipment, right? So like the next phase of the business, this is not now, but 2 or 3 years down the line, is how do we private label our own equipment, and sell that equipment, and of course become a little bit more profitable, right?
Yeah.
So and of course for that we'll need a lot more money because we have to buy that from China, like store it, have a warehouse. So it's a lot more expenses in the front end. However, in the back end, it's more profitable, right? So
Is there?
all right, how do we get to that point?
Is there a structure or a process that you've implemented for specifically when it's time for you to work on the business? Like, what does that time look like? Do you have set aside time where you're strategizing or doing planning long term, or what does that look like for you?
So we just started implementing, and I'm sure you heard of the book Traction.
Yes.
So we started implementing that the EOS system about 6 months ago.
Yep.
So it's like, all right, we're doing the 3 month meetings, the weekly meetings also with the leadership team. So we're strategizing like that, as far as myself, I kind of just like, I rely a lot on my leadership team for all the companies to kind of help me with that and to strategize. And then again, like I said before, like, I kind of challenge them to make sure, hey, how do we make it better? How do we make it more efficient? Like, and then, and usually I like the answer to come from them because it's just a lot, that's, it's better
Yeah.
than me just feeding them and kind of like, solving the problem. And sometimes we do it together, like, and sometimes, for example, because I'm in also different industries, I grab a little bit from each industry and say, hey, this is working for industry, maybe it can work in this industry, and then kind of run with that also as well.
Yeah. Man, I should be making commission with EOS and Traction. The amount of times we've talked about it on this podcast.
Yeah, you should definitely.
It's freaking phenomenal. And the audience is like, man, if they haven't started using it by this point, they're crazy because it's the most consistent thing I've heard brought up on this when it comes to what helps me work on the business, being able to take those principles, implement those rhythms, those quarterly plannings, those annual plannings, those weekly L10 meetings, all that stuff. Has been talked about ad nauseum. I'm curious, with you having multiple businesses, how do you implement that across multiple businesses? Do you have like a leadership team and a component that's applied to all of it? Or is it broken down like we do EOS and our meetings for this business separately from this?
Yeah, it's separate.
Got
because
it.
one is an e-commerce business, the other one is a tourism business. So, it has
Not too much overlap.
Yeah, so like I try to keep it separate. I mean, we're all in the same office, in different parts of the office, but at the end of the day, like we try to keep each business separate.
And are you playing that visionary component in all of the businesses?
Yes.
Gotcha. How is that? That's got to be a big draw on your time.
It is, but I already have the vision set. I already have like, hey, this is what we're gonna do. This is what we want to accomplish in the next 3, 6 years, 10 years, whatever, right? And like the my right hand person for each business knows kind of what they have to do and what's the next step. And then of course they come back to me, they report back to me, and they say, okay, yes, we're doing it correctly, or we're not doing it correctly, or what do we have to change in order to do things correct and go to where we want to go to exactly, right?
Yeah. How do you decide where your time goes with those 3 businesses? How do you split your time and your focus?
So for the most part, both tourism and the e-commerce business are somewhat automated. Like everything's already kind of working. So if I had to like step out of the business for a month, which I have done before, like it would work without me having to be there. There's certain things I have to do still, but not too many. So right now I'm kind of more focusing on the real estate investing a little bit more, which that's something that we just launched about a year ago. So
Okay.
we're kind of like learning about that and working on that. So that's kind of like where my focus is at right now.
What did it look like for you to get those 2 businesses to a place where you could step away for a month and things not fall apart? That's a pretty big feat.
I think just have the right team, the right culture, right? At first, like I'm not a good systems guy, but like definitely the culture, like everyone likes working here, everyone likes being at the office. Not everyone, for the most part, everyone.
Sure.
But like they enjoy working here. They enjoy, like I said, the ambiance, and obviously they work hard because of that, right? So they take ownership. Obviously, like Traction, for example, talks about the core values that you should have. So like we kind of live that on a day to day. Like in most of the meetings that we have, we always talk about the core values that we have in order for them to continue thinking about that, right?
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And then like, once we did that, once they noticed, hey, people actually like coming here and working here, right? Like, why don't now it's time to create the systems, and of course the systems is something that we constantly just improve little by little, right? Like, all right, what KPIs, how are we measuring sales? How are we measuring the amount of calls, all these things?
Yeah. What do you think? I'm sure it's not the same for everybody, but in general, what has most contributed to them being happy and wanting to work?
I think just like, I don't know, it's a lot of things, right? Like one, it could be like my personality, like I have an easygoing personality, but at the same time I want results, so like I'm friendly with everyone, but at the same time I know how to get the best out of them. I try to help everyone as much as possible as well, so I think they notice that. And like most of this guy, most of my team tells me like, hey, you know what, we haven't worked for a boss ever before where they actually care about us. They
Yeah.
actually sit down, talk to us, have lunch with us. Like for example, I remember one of our accountants, right, one of our bookkeepers. He was telling me, he's like, look, I worked for another company for like 2 years, and I must have said 3 words to the boss. And then here he is sitting down with me like almost every week. Like he's asking me for advice. I take my time. Like I stop what I'm doing. Like, all right, what do you need? Like, how can I help you? Obviously, if I do that all day long, like, I wouldn't get any results. But at the same time, I take a little bit of time to help people out, to say hello to everyone, and that just comes from my personality. And I think people really appreciate that.
So that comes natural to you. You didn't have to intentionally work on that aspect of it.
I think it comes naturally to me. Just making sure that everyone's fine, everyone's good. Like obviously it's tougher. It's harder. It's harder to do than saying it, right? But at the end of the day, I kind of enjoy doing that too, right? Like, and one of my biggest things is like making sure that everyone reaches their goal or reaches their dreams, right? So like even if my companies are a vehicle for them to reach that, I want them to leave my company better than when they got here.
Cool. I love that. Yeah, first time I had that idea of how business could play out was reading Yvon Chouinard's book, and he's the founder of Patagonia. It's called Let My People Surf. And he had a very similar philosophy that I hadn't heard before, which is like, hey, either I'm hiring someone whose long-term fit is here and I want it to make it as awesome as possible, or hopefully we're a catalyst for wherever they're really supposed to be. And he saw even firing people as setting them free towards a better place to work, And I was like, that's a really cool way of seeing it,
Yeah, I forgot. I went to a marketing conference, and the guy was like, "Yeah, we free them into the market."
Correct. Yes.
I was like, "That's a pretty good way to look at it."
And he had two kind of things, which I thought was beautiful too. He said, either that person has earned enough of my respect and loyalty that I will actively set them free. Meaning I'll say, hey, I know it's not a good fit here, but you've earned the right that I'd be happy to make an introduction. Like, let me help think through where you might fit better. Or they haven't earned that and I'm setting them free on their own. Like you go figure it out yourself, And I've seen both those play out in my business.
Yep. That's funny.
I love that, man.
It's the same way.
It's a healthy way of thinking about it, though. It's a generous way of thinking about it. It's a healthy way of thinking about it. I really like it.
Yeah, because if they're not happy where they're at, or they're not happy doing what they're doing, then what's the point of them doing that, right?
Correct.
Like what I tried before, for example, some people some people in my company, right? They started doing customer service, and I saw that they weren't happy. So I was like, all right. I sat down with them, and if like you said, if they had my respect, and I know that they were hard workers. Okay, what else can you do? What else do you want to do with the company? And some of them moved to marketing, some of them moved to different departments, and they're like, hey, we're happy here. I'm like, great.
Yeah.
That's what basically my job is, right? Like, it's to make sure that you guys are as happy and as efficient as possible. Because otherwise, if you hate your job, you're not gonna do a good job. You may do a good job, but you're not gonna do a great job.
Yeah, you'll do enough to not get fired.
Correct.
And that's not optimal results.
Yeah, especially with the vision that I have, like where we want to get to. Like, I want to make sure that every seat is everyone is sitting in the correct seat.
Yeah. Yeah, I found that super helpful. The people analyzer with Traction and EOS helps you understand, is this a person we can move around, or is this a person we need to move on? Right? And the values seem to be the biggest indicator of whether I'm going to be willing to move you in a different seat, or if you don't align with our values, no seat here is going to be good for you. Have you seen that? So that's basically how the people analyzer works, is like, hey, if there's going to be an option for you to move somewhere, it's because you nail our values. And then it's just a matter of like, we didn't put you in the right seat and we could find a different department and your skills come to life. But if you're not meeting our values, that means you're not good fit anywhere in the company. And so let's help you move along.
I agree with that. Yeah. Exactly.
The other thing that you've done well that I really like is we talk about making leadership simple, because it's so complex sometimes. I've got to be this to people and I got to be this to people. And it's like, how can we simplify it to some degree? And the simple way is, can I support my people and challenge them at the same time? And so the support is what you talked about. Like, I actually get to know you. I make sure we have a relationship and you're offered resources to be successful, training, money, whatever it is, that's support. But I also challenge you. We have like real goals we're going after. I'm pushing you to get better. And when those two come together, you have a really dynamic leadership style. And it sounds like you've integrated those two. No one does it perfectly, but you've integrated those two aspects pretty well.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. Because sometimes like sometimes like half of the time we don't even know. Like, hey, are we doing it correctly?
Sure, of course.
Thank you. And yeah, like that's. I mean, I've taken a lot of leadership classes, and then obviously I had to develop that because in the beginning I didn't know what I was doing. Right. Luckily, I think I'm doing an okay job doing all those things. Right. And it also goes back to like the purpose. What purpose are you giving them? Like, what's the reason? Why are they doing it? Right. Like, for example, like one of the, hopefully nobody from my team hears this, but one of the most boring jobs in the company is the data, like, hey, data entry, right? But when you give them a reason, like, hey, you're doing that so when clients come in and see the product, make sure the information is correct. And so you're one of the most important roles that we have in the company.
Yeah.
Which is like, without you, the information is not correct and people are going to leave. So like, now you're giving them a purpose. Now that you're giving them your why. They're like, oh, so, and if they understand it, and then you kind of have to like also sell that role, sell the vision that you have,
Yeah.
which goes into the purpose aspect of it.
Yeah. I mean, if there's something that is actually a part of the business and it needs to be a part of the business, then there has to be a fundamental purpose for it. And so the question is, can we uncover what that fundamental purpose is and that person see it? And then now they belong. They understand data is not just entering numbers, it's creating trust and visibility, and it's creating, access to information that's going to help us make decisions. All that now enforces why am I spending my time doing that? So that's really well done. Now, it sounds like you've spent a lot of time just on your own, investing in yourself, learning. What does that look like for you?
I mean,
or maybe say what has been the most profitable ventures you've taken and kind of self-learning.
So there's been a couple, right, where I've taken leadership classes, and then I actually became a life coach, which I don't practice. But I
you probably bring it into your day-to-day with your employee. Yeah.
Yeah. The only reason I kind of took that class was like, hey, I want to do it for myself, for my personal life, for my business life, and see for my team. But I don't really practice that outside of outside of the companies, right? That and also like just having a good network of people around me, like through all these masterminds that I did, through like I have a good network of people, and then we kind of like we speak a lot about certain things that we're going through, right? So for example, when I didn't have that network and I was going through it in the business or just anything, I would always think, oh man, I'm the only person that's going through this.
Yes.
And then once I kind of opened up and became vulnerable and spoken to more successful people than I have, and I was like, hey, I'm going through this, because half of the time you don't want to talk about that.
Yep.
Right? You want to kind of keep it to yourself because you're either embarrassed, which was my thing. Like I was like, oh man, I can't believe I'm going through this. I must be the only person. I don't want to talk about it with anybody. So once I kind of opened up and became vulnerable, I found out that a lot of like very successful entrepreneurs went through the same thing that I went through several times. So I was like, oh, okay, so I'm not that bad, right? Like I remember the first time I kind of was going through it where I was like, oh man, the business is going to fail. I spoke to somebody. The guy started laughing at me. Like the successful dude started laughing at me. He's like, kid, this is your first time of many times that you're going to go through it. So just embrace it. Because after this, you're going to scale up. You're going to have a big jump. While you're going through it, it sucks. It's tough. But once and if you get through it, if you're strong enough mentally to get through it, you're going to become that much better entrepreneur. You're going to become a much better person, or whatever it may be, right? So that kind of gave me two things. One, it was like, okay, I'm not the only one that has gone through it. That was one. And two is like, okay, let me just go through this, which of course is, again, it's easier said than done, because while you're going through it, you're really going through it. You could be, you could be depressed, you could be whatever, and then you're like, you don't know how you're going to get out of it. But somehow, because I never gave up, I always kind of like get out of it, get out of those situations.
Man, you can't understate the importance of not feeling alone and weird when you're in that challenge. Like that weight being lifted off when you find out I'm not the only one who's gone through this. I'm not the only one who's dealt with this. doesn't change the reality of the situation, but it takes a huge weight off of you to tackle it, right?
Yeah, yeah. Because again, you're thinking, man, I suck. I must be the only person going through this, and
Yeah.
it's not true. Like I think every successful person has gone through it, and
Yes.
multiple times. Because obviously we're entrepreneurs, right? So we always like, hey, let's try this. Hey, let's try this. Let's try this. And of course, 9 out of 10 ideas are probably going to fail.
Yep.
One is going to be successful, but by the time you get to the 8 or 9 idea, you're like, damn, I suck. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. And then that 10 idea just kind of hits, and you're like, okay, like this saved me, or this was great. Like now we can move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Of course, little by little, like what I learned is like, all right, let's be more strategic with all these ideas instead of just going, oh, one, let's think about it. Let's think about what's going to happen. What are the situations? What are the mistakes? And luckily, I have good people in my team where they kind of like, they tell me like, hey, Juan, I don't think this is going to work for this. Okay, good. You bringing me something that could happen. Let's think about that. Let's go through it. Because I'm very like, hey, let's do it. And sometimes I need people to like, hey, calm down, relax. Let's think about every situation and what can happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I found something so it's applicable on multiple levels. Like the more I get founders and business owners like you together, or let's say you're doing it yourself, an EO or whatever mastermind, that's the first obvious benefit is everybody goes, oh, dude, I'm not alone at learning this game of business, at learning, because that's the bigger thing is like, it's not about each individual idea. It's I'm learning about how to be an entrepreneur, how to build successful businesses. And I get stuck in these moments of, I think I'm failing. I don't know what I'm doing. And people help you out of it. What I found really encouraging is when business owners start understanding the same thing might be true for their people, even though they're not at the same risk in the game of entrepreneur. If we just think about it as a learning journey, that like when I learned to ride a bike, if I learned to swim, if I learned a new language, you will always hit what we call a pit of despair. Every time. You will hit a pit of despair where you think, I can't do this. This is too hard. I'm the only one incapable of learning this. And the question is, do we know how to move people through that pit of despair? Or do they quit and go somewhere else and try a whole new thing only to hit the same moment again in a different career? And so I'll often be talking internally to companies about this learning curve, and I'll see a few people's eyes light up when I talk about the pit of despair. And I start saying, hey, you might be listening to me right now, and you're currently in the pit of despair. You just took over for the first time as a leader of a department, and you're feeling like you don't know how to lead people, but you're scared to talk about it. You're scared to ask for help. Or you just started a new role in sales, and you're like, I don't know if I can do this. I was like, you can either suffer silently and probably quit or get fired, or you can reach out to the right leader and say, hey, I think I'm in a normal part of this journey, but it's scaring the crap out of me. And we encourage the leaders, like all you need to offer them are TVE, time, more time than you normally give them, vision for where they are and where they're going, and encouragement, like specific encouragement. How can they get out of the pit of despair? What skill do they need to learn? What character is being developed in them, whatever it is. And man, it's like usually people are crying because they felt like you, but at a smaller level. Like, I'm failing. I don't want to let Juan down. He gave me this role and I don't know if I can do it. It's like, if we can have that same vulnerability that you found towards other business owners internally in the company, then people don't suffer silently and they just work through the challenge and they're on the other side. Have you seen that before?
Of course. Like, I mean, funny, right? Like, it's, whenever I done e-commerce, for example, for so long that in all the roles in my company, that sometimes people come up to me and then they're like, oh, I don't know how to do this. Before, I used to be like, this is so easy. How do you not know how to do this? Like,
Yeah.
and then like people were like, Juan, you've been doing this for 10 years. Of course you know how to do this. Of course it's easy. And then like, little by little, I was like, you know what, they're right.
Yeah.
Let me break it down. Let me break it down step by step and, and thing by thing. Like that way they know how to do it. But that pit of despair that you spoke about, I heard it from so many different people.
Yeah.
And that's why they quit a lot.
Yes.
A lot of people quit, when the going gets tough. And one of the advices I give to everyone is, because I've gone through it probably over 10 times already, where I've thought about quitting multiple times. And I'm just like, you know what? No, let me work through it, because sometimes I have no choice, and sometimes it's just like, hey, I want to see what happens after this, right? Before, yeah, like I was like, hey, I have no choice, but now I'm kind of with the mentality. I was like, all right, I know this is normal. I know that I have to go through this. I know I'm going through like a stage in the process where it's
Yep.
really hard, but let me just go through it. Let me continue learning. Let me see where I can learn or become more efficient or learn it in a better way or get coaching from somebody that's actually done it, right? So I kind of I'm trying to do the same thing with my people where it's just like, all right, you're, for example, the new sales guy, the new sales manager, right? All right, you're a new sales manager. What do you have to do in order to be successful? Let's do this. Let's do this. Let's keep the KPIs. Let's do coaching sessions every day. I'll coach you on how to be a better leader. You'll coach your team on how to do sales, so on and so on and so on, right?
Yep.
So that's kind of like the strategy that I'm taking. But that pit of
that's awesome.
Is awesome. Like
The way I talk about it on the vision piece is I said, if you've been to a mall recently, I don't go very often, but you can probably picture going into a mall. They're often so big that sometimes you don't know what entrance you came in. You don't know where you're at. And so the first thing you do is you find that map, usually on a kiosk, that says you are here. And once you understand where you are, you can then orient yourself. And so when people just know there's a thing called the pit of despair in any learning curve, anything, you want to learn anything, you're going to hit a pit of despair. They go, oh, okay. So it's not personal. It's not reflective of my ultimate capability. It's just the part of the process that sucks. All right, well, then how do I get from here to there? And then we're having a productive conversation. And so what's funny is I actually had this happen to me, which is humbling because I teach this thing. And the way it came about was hilarious. We hired, this is like 4 years ago, first time we'd ever hired an executive admin. And it was her first time ever being an executive admin. She had the right personality for it, the right skill set. So we gave it a chance. We thought we trained her well on our expectations and whatever. And it was about 2 months into doing it. And we had just noticed her attitude wasn't bad, but it was dropping from like excited and eager to like seemingly overwhelmed and stressed. And so I was making a mental note of it. And then she would be on some of my training calls and she was listening to me teach the pit of despair. And I get off and she calls me immediately and she starts crying. She goes, "Drew, I'm in the pit of despair." And I was like, whoa, really? Like on my team? And she was like, yes. She was like, I'm working 16 hours a day. I feel like I'm never catching up. I'm overwhelmed. I'm working on weekends. I go, hold on. I was like, you should never be working 16 hours a day for my company. You should never be working weekends. We never want you to do that. Why are you doing that? And then she starts to show me her process. And it was so simple, Juan. I miscommunicated or she heard differently. Any idea we had or any to-do we gave her, she took them all as needing to be done now. And so she had this endless list of things that she thought the workday wasn't over until I cleared the list. And we were like, we just started going through her list. Like half of these aren't till next year. These we don't expect for the next quarter. And like all the weight started coming off of her. I was like, we didn't prepare you well, right? And so getting in there and recognizing what's really going on, she got out of the pit of despair and then boom, she was moving on. But it can happen even to someone like me who's teaching it all the time, where you just assume someone's doing well or you assume they know what their role is. And then you do what you do well, which is meet with them. And you go, oh man, let me teach you your role. I don't think we've taught you, what our expectations are, right? And then they're on their way.
Yeah, but I think the first thing, like you said, is really like kind of like, hey, this is happening and it's okay.
It's okay.
You're going to go through this.
Yep.
Right? Just realizing that this is a big part of the process.
Yes.
Because before I didn't know that was part of the process. And then because I guess I got so used to going through it, I'm just like, and then how I am, just like, yeah, let me just work through it. Or I spoke it to somebody, right? Like I didn't know my guys were going through the same thing. I didn't know how to handle it.
Yeah.
Once I realized, okay, I just put somebody as a manager for whatever department. How do I get them more? Like I didn't was just like, hey, you're a manager, you figure it out.
Yeah.
Now it's just like, all right, how do we make them successful? Like, what do you have to do? Like, how do you become a good leader? How do you become a good communicator? That way you communicate my ideas that I'm telling you to the team. That way they can execute.
Yeah.
So like, those are also, I think, very important.
Yeah. And I always tell people too, the pit of despair is going to change on intensity based on what you're learning. Like, so some people go, is it really true in everything I learn? It's like, well, yeah, you had the pit of despair learning to ride a bike, but if that coordination comes kind of easy to you, it wasn't very intense. It was like mild doubt. It was like a mild question of, can I do this? But you move through it really quickly. But then you find something else and it's got a deep intensity to you where you're like, oh, I'm really questioning myself. All the same thing. It's just for whatever reason, this is more intense to you than something you learned over here that was kind of relatively quickly you move through that. Have you seen that as well? Where it's like, yeah, I learned sales pretty quickly. I probably had a pit of despair, but it was like over in a blip. And then I was on and I had leading people or whatever. And it really, like, that was intense
Of
for me.
course, I mean, in different aspects of it, right? Like not even in just business, but like I'm a big fan of martial arts, and I do triathlons now. So like that's certain things just came naturally to me in martial arts, and certain things didn't, right? Where I was just like, oh man, like I know how to throw a punch, but like for example, right, throwing a kick is just it's completely different. So
Yeah.
how do I like actually what happened to me was like I was a big striker. Like I'm very big into Muay Thai and the striking arts. And once I got into Jiu-Jitsu, oh man, completely different martial art. And like for a year, I was like, I suck. Like got really down on myself because I was like, I didn't know how to do it. Completely different thing, completely different moves. And once kind of, I guess, I went through that pit of despair, I actually started getting good after a year of doing that. So like
Wow.
so just like that in martial arts, I mean you bring that into the business world, and like shit, I was good at sales,
Yeah.
I wasn't good or didn't have the patience for logistics. So when I started doing logistics, my energy was just drained. I'm like, I have to do this now. All right, I kind of will leave it towards the end of the day, which of
Yeah.
course, if you don't do the logistics, nothing gets shipped.
Yeah. Yeah. What's been, everybody that does martial arts always raves about its value beyond just the sport itself. What are some of the things that you found most valuable from being in martial arts for so long?
I think the discipline and the resilience. Because I mean, like we were like, I done Muay Thai, I done karate, I done Jeet Kune Do, and you have to fight against like bigger guys. Like I'm 5'6", so I'm not even that tall. So like I used to fight against guys that are 5'8", 5'10", and you're looking at them. I'm like, oh man, this is literally a big mountain to climb, and but if you overthink it, it's put it this way, it's worse thinking about it than actually doing it.
Oh, come on.
Right? Like once you're like you, for example, I would look at the guy, I was like, damn, he's 5'10", gotta fight him now. And then my mind would just go like, okay, what happens if he does this? What happens if he does this? What happens if he beats me up? What happens like, if I fall down or I get knocked out, everyone's gonna laugh at me. But once you're in there and you just start moving, you're like, okay, this is not that bad. And I had several things like that happen to me. In different leadership training. For example, I did a 75-hour military training, nonstop.
Wow.
Actually, you see the yaks right there?
Yeah.
That's actually, once you graduate, that's they give you that access, part of something called the Modern Day Knights, from a guy named, you probably heard of, Bedros Koulian.
I don't think I have.
Okay, so look him up. He actually
Okay.
designed a 75-hour challenge called the Modern Day Night Challenge.
Cool.
The MDKs, right? So unfortunately, we had the last class. We actually reached 20 classes, so they shut it down. So like they don't do it anymore. However,
Dang.
I'm class 15, right? So during during the 75-hour training, first of all, I'm not good with the cold. So we had to do a challenge where we were going to go into the water in San Diego, which is cold, freezing water, at 3 o'clock in the morning. So the coaches,
No, thank you.
Yeah, well, I didn't have that choice. It was either that or hey, walk away and you give up.
Yeah.
So the coaches, of course, or the people that were leading the training were like, hey, you're going to go in there and you're going to turn blue. Once you turn blue, we're going to keep you there until you turn purple. And I'm just like, oh my God, I'm already like freezing. I'm already wet without even having to going into the water, to the beach. I'm already wet and I'm already freezing. I think I'm shaking like this. And I'm like, I don't think I could do this. I don't think I could do this, right? And I tell my guy right next to me, and I was like, hey, bro, I don't think I can make this happen. He grabs my hand and just, he's like, you're not going anywhere. You stay here with us. And I'm like, oh my God.
Oh, that's awesome.
So the guys go like, start walking to the beach, start walking to the water. So in my mind, I literally started tearing because I was like, I can't believe I'm going to do this. Like, why do I even do this to myself? It's going to be cold. Like millions of thoughts are running through my mind. Why, like I wasn't going to be happy doing this. I was going to, feel a lot of pain basically because I'm going into the cold water in November in San Diego. So we're walking. As soon as I put my first foot in the water, I'm like, oh man, this water is warmer than outside. Because it was so windy outside and I was so cold and I was wet that the wind would hit me and I was cold. But inside the water, like once you went inside the water, I was like, oh man, it's warmer here.
Wow.
So, which kind of taught me, I was like, man, I literally was just suffering for 15 minutes or 20 minutes before I went into the water, and my mind was racing with so many negative thoughts. Which once I got into the water, I was like, man, the water's warmer than it was outside, you know. So, and the funny thing is that two people quit because of that before they got into the water. Like as we were walking to the water, one they called us back. They were like, "Oh, one guy quit." Boom. Like, you know, he rang the bell and he quit. You know, I was like, "Oh man, like that guy's like 6'5". I'm 5'6". Like, if he's quitting, like what do I get? Like what's gonna happen to me? But it's just like, you know, like I said, the fear of you do like what goes through your mind before you actually do it. It's that anxiety that you feel, right? Like
yes,
of course, it's easier said than done to control that, but it's very hard. You know,
yes.
I can't even control that sometimes. I still go through it. But you know, luckily because I have gone through so many of these things, I'm just like, all right, calm down, relax. You've been here before. You know, you've been in tougher situations than this, and you can get through it. But again, like we said before, while you're going through it, you're really going through it.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of like, hey, don't quit. Just go through it. Make it happen.
Yeah. Man, that is such a good analogy. I'm a chronic overthinker, like 100%. I always say there's some people that think too little and do too much, and there's other people that think too much and do too little. I err, if I'm not careful, on the think too much. Imagining, like you said, with the fighter, all right, how's this going to go? What if I get embarrassed? What if this, that, and the other? But there's a Seneca, I think it's Seneca, who is a Stoic philosopher, that said we suffer more in imagination than we do in reality. And I was like, that's my life. I've suffered way more in here than what the moment itself has made me suffer. You know?
We all go through that. I think we
Yeah.
all go through that. I mean, we're just overthinkers. We think that the worst situation is going to happen. We think we're going to get embarrassed. We think, hey, like, you know, people are going to laugh at me. Like, if we fail, what are people going to say? And I mean, I go through that still. I still go through that. You know, and I have gone through it multiple times in my life. I'm 42. So I've gone through it multiple times in my life, and I still think like that. So, I mean, it's not like you're going to do this, and you're never going to think that way. For people like, I guess, like you and I, we're always going to, that's part of our personality.
It's going to be a tendency. Yeah.
You know? But at the end of the day, you have to realize, hey, I know that I'm going to go through this. I know that I'm going to think like this. Just relax, try to control it, and try to just do your best to get through it. Is there a way to fix that? I'm sure there is. I just don't know what it is.
It might be psilocybin or some drug like that out there. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's when I wake up to the pattern, do I have the courage to jump into action? If I wake up to it, I know what's going on. I'm like, okay, I'm overthinking this again. Then do I have the courage to look back and see all those moments where it was the same thing and the answer lied, and just taking the next step. Take the next step, get into the action. Sometimes my life gets not enjoyable when I don't choose the courage and I stay on the sideline. I keep debating about the decision. I keep looking at options versus my life has improved every time I go, nope, get in the water. Come on, let's get in the water. Let's figure it out. We'll freaking figure it out when we get there. Then things are in motion. And when you're reacting to things in motion, you and I are actually really great at handling those things. That's the crazy part. Is like, I've rarely been in a situation where I'm like, I don't know what to do. Once I get in there, I kind of figure it out. It's all the sideline where the suffering happens.
It's just taking that first step, I think.
Yes.
You know, like the analogy that I used at the beach, right? Like, hey, taking one step at a time. And you know what, actually, I come across lately? Be present. You know, because you're, like, I'm really, actually, you know what, if there's a way to get out of it, I said I didn't know. Actually, there is. Just try to be present as much as possible. So I have this little mantra which I actually put on my phone, which I'll show you.
Yeah.
Right? What it says, I don't know if you can read it, but I'll read it to you. It says, where are you? Here. What time is it? Now. What are you? This moment. So like lately, I've been kind of like focusing on that mantra a lot, right? Like all right, hey, you're here. It's here now, and I'm this moment. and that kind of helps me like relax. Breathing obviously helps a lot too. But
What does that help you with?
I have anxiety problems. Not
Same.
anxiety, like the crazy anxiety problems, but I do have like, because I'm an overthinker. Like I do think like, okay, what's the worst situation that can happen? Because technically I have trained my mind to do that as an entrepreneur. Because I'm like, okay, if I do this, what's gonna happen? And then like that my brain kind of works like that, right? So it's so because of that, like I'm always thinking of the worst situation that can happen. So when I practice that mantra and I breathe and I kind of focus on the moment, it helps me relax first of all, and it helps me focus a lot more and think clearly and come up with a solution for whatever the problem is.
I love that. Similar to me, man. I remember my wife called me out years ago where I don't extrovert often my thoughts, but I was extroverting my thoughts with her. And she goes, God, everything is what if it doesn't? What if it doesn't go this way? What if it doesn't work? And she goes, what if it does? And I was like, I hadn't even considered that. Like, she was like, what if it does work? What if you do like it? What if it is a huge success? And I was like, do people think that way? She was like, yeah.
It's funny. I had to train myself to think that way.
Yeah.
Because half of the time I'm just like, oh, what if it doesn't work? What if this happens? What if that happens? What if that happens? And then I think one of my coaches actually was like, yeah. And actually now, they kind of say the same thing that your wife told me. Like, okay, what if it does work? Because yes, there is a big chance that you could fail.
Yeah.
But there is just as a big enough chance that you can actually succeed.
Yes.
So it's like, if you weigh out those things, it's probably 50-50.
Yeah.
Maybe 40-60, like, give or take. But even if you have a 99%, the 99% that you could fail and 1% that you can succeed, you could still get out of it.
Yeah.
You could still be successful and you could still make it happen.
Yes.
So like I'm really trying to like train myself to do that. Like, hey, even if it's a 1% chance that I'm going to succeed, that's all I need.
Yeah. And if I come in timid because I'm so concerned about it failing, it actually seems to increase the chances of failing. Whereas if I come in hoping and expecting to succeed, whatever the starting percentage was changes. That's been my experience. Like, it becomes more likely I'll succeed if I'm fully in it and I'm believing this can work, and you're throwing your resources, your weight, your energy at it. It's like that changes the percentage outcome, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's a vision aspect of it, right? Like if you have the vision and you know where you're going, more than likely you're most likely going to succeed. And you have good strategies behind that. You have good team, good people.
Yeah.
You take it step by step. What do I do next? What do I do next in order to make it? What do I do next? All right, and and like I said, what I'm trying to practice is staying in the moment. Cool. Now you're focusing. You're thinking clearly. You're thinking about the options. Yes, of course you have to think about what not to do, but you also have to know what to do.
Yeah.
Which I think the way your brain and my brain works is just like, hey, we already know what can happen, what can go wrong.
Right.
So let's not do that. So let's focus on what we need to do.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Well, listen, man, I've already kept you for over an hour. I really appreciate your time. The one question that we usually like to ask is there a book you've read in the past or you're reading now that you would most recommend to our audience for anything we've talked about today?
I mean, Traction is, like, I'm pretty sure mostly there's a lot of entrepreneurs listening to this. Traction is probably the most practical business book that I've ever read. And I've read a lot of business books, right? That's, it'll help you basically figure out where to go from A to Z when it comes to your business. And the book that I'm reading right now, it's Never Split the Difference.
Chris Voss, yes.
Yeah. So I'm rereading it again because it's just such a great book. And funny, as I kind of lift up Never Split the Difference, me being a martial artist.
Samurai strategies. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, this book is really, really good. It's it's basically Musashi, like one of the greatest samurai swordsmen that ever lived. How he lived his life, discipline. How he taught himself how to become a swordsman. So that's a great book as well.
Beautiful. Juan, thank you so much for being here, man. It's been an honor to talk to you, and it's clear to me why you've been so successful and why you will be in the future. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Drew. Well, thank you for having me, and I appreciate the conversation too. I learned a lot.
Yes, sir.
Founders, thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast and hop into our monthly founder email so we can ensure you stay on the edge of peak performance and massive business results.